This episode is sponsored by Team Builder, yet another company that's doing great things for the first responder community. As a strength and conditioning coach myself who also trains tactical athletes, dissemination of wellness information is one of the biggest challenges. Now, Team Builder is the premier strength and conditioning software for tactical athletes, and there are several features that really impress me. Firstly, there is a full exercise library, so you, the personal trainer, does not have to create that within your own department. Secondly, you can send out programming, but also individualize, which I love. So you blanket program for everyone. Now you can tweak based on someone's injury, someone's need to maybe drop some body composition, rather than having to write a program for every single person on their own. Team Builder also allows you to build custom questionnaires to collate health and wellness data. It integrates with wearables. And I think one of the most important things is obviously it tracks. To me, it's imperative that we as a profession start tracking our people from day one and then over the full span of their career, therefore catching potential wellness issues and injuries before they happen. Now, if you want to try Team Builder, they are offering you, the audience of the Behind the Shield podcast, a free 14-day trial to experience all of the features. And if you want to take a deeper dive into Team Builder, listen to episode 1032 with Melissa Mercado, or go to teambuilder.com. And I'll spell that to you because it's not as you'd think, TEAMBUILDR.com. Welcome to the Behind the Shield podcast. As always, my name's James Gearing, and this week it is my absolute honor to welcome on the show flight nurse and author Erik Usher. Now, in this conversation, we discuss a host of topics, from Erik's journey into the world of nursing, pre-hospital medicine, the idiosyncrasies of flight medicine, cadaver labs, using children's books to educate our children on what we do in the police and fire uniforms, and so much more. Now, before we get to this incredible conversation, as I say every week, please just take a moment. Go to whichever app you listen to this on, subscribe to the show, leave feedback, and leave a rating. Every single 5-star rating truly does elevate this podcast, therefore making it easier for others to find. And this is a free library of well over 1,000 episodes now. So all I ask in return is that you help share these incredible men and women's stories so I can get them to every single person on planet Earth who needs to hear them. So with that being said, I introduce to you Erik Usher. Enjoy. Well, Erik, I want to start by saying thank you so much for taking the time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Honestly, the thanks are all on my end. You do an amazing job. I think I told you this in private, after we dialogue. I feel like I have imposter syndrome because the caliber of people you have speak and the stories you get out of them are fantastic. So the pleasure's all mine, really. Thank you for taking the time.
No problem at all. So where on planet Earth are we finding you today?
I am in beautiful Davis Islands in Tampa, Florida.
Fantastic. Let's start at the very beginning of your timeline, because I know it takes you all over the place. Tell me where you were born and tell me a little bit about your family dynamic, what your parents did, how many siblings.
If I get wordy, rein me in. So
you got all the time in the world.
Born in Bristol, Connecticut. It's a small town. Right now it's known for ESPN's headquarters in Bristol. Before that, it wasn't known for much of anything. Born there in 1973, grew up there till I was about 10 years old. The reason we made a move to Terryville, Connecticut, where really the bulk of my life has been before I left, is my parents. My father was a machine shop worker, no collegiate education, no formal education. My mother was a secretary. And so they did a lot to make ends meet, multiple shifts. So we didn't grow up in the most affluent environment. I didn't spend the same year in a school until middle school, which would have been seventh grade. Every year was a different school just because we couldn't afford the rent or the checks would bounce. So we just moved house to house to house. And then at the age 10, we lived pretty close to a more dilapidated and crime ridden part of Bristol. And I was jumped while I was on my bicycle by about 5 or 6 guys. And my parents were like, okay, we're moving to Terryville. It's safer, it's smaller town. And so we moved to Terryville, which was great. Um, Terryville is a very small town. I think there was maybe 4,000 people in the town. Um, my high school had less than 400 people in the whole school, but I was afforded some opportunities there that I would never have been afforded in Bristol. Um, so I have one brother, Carl. He's older, a couple of years, 2.5 years. Uh, the kind of fast forward to like where I became infatuated with EMS started with my brother. He was dating a girl, and that girl's mother was a nurse at Bristol Hospital. She was the educator, and she convinced my brother that he should go and be an EMT. So he went to EMT school, and of course, there's always sibling rivalry. So I would poke fun at him all the time, oh, look at you riding the ambulance. And then he said, well, there's no way you could ever even pass that test. I bet you couldn't even, make it in halfway through the class. So my career in EMS started on a bet with my brother. So the small town it was, it had a volunteer ambulance service. I went to Bristol Hospital, and while I was in middle school, I was in the beginning of high school. I was 15 years old when I started. So every Friday night, I would go to EMT school, which was atypical for that age group, small town. You're out partying and having a good time. Not that I didn't do that. Uh, but anyway, I got my EMT, and uh, the very first call I had was a cardiac arrest. And I can describe that like it's happened right in front of me now. I mean, rolling up this 3-story home, and the screams were the first thing I heard. This man's daughter was just screaming and crying, and I was 15 years old and just had no idea really what was going on. So ran the cardiac arrest up on the third floor. He was, wedged between a toilet and a wall, and I'm just taking it all in, going, how are we even going to get this guy down? And the medic's like, Eric, get on the chest. And so I get on the chest because that's about the only thing that I could do. And then he's like, hey, Jackrabbit, slow it down a little bit. So all this adrenaline's coming out, and I'm mimicking my heart rate with each compression. But we get the guy down. We get him to the hospital, and it wasn't a save. There was no ROSC, but like I'm digesting this whole thing that happened in front of me, the sights, the sounds, the smells. It was captivating, and I couldn't process why it was captivating. But that kind of launched me into being thankful to be in this small little town, because the high school was 2 houses down from our ambulance corps, our volunteer ambulance corps. So when I was 16, I was able to run ambulance calls all 4 years of high school. I carried a pager. If I kept my GPA up, pager would go off, leave class, hop out the window, go over to the ambulance corps and go run calls, and come back with a Dunkin' Donuts coffee and some McDonald's. And it was pretty cool. I don't think many places you can do that, with that. But it's a double-edged sword growing up in a small town like that when you're doing EMS. I mean, you see the seedier side of behind the closed door. And in a small town, you know, you're seeing things you shouldn't see of people you go to school with. There was a point one time where I had to even call Child Protective Services on classmates after running a call, and it just creates a weird environment. But anyway, that's why I got an EMS, and that's, born in Bristol, raised in Terryville, and then went to nursing school. Again, didn't have a lot of funds, and got a few scholarships, but went to a 2-year diploma program at St. Francis Hospital School of Nursing. No longer exists. I was there for like 100 and something years. Phenomenal education. And then I started being a nurse and still ran EMS, and I don't know how far you want me to go.
Well, firstly, what happened to the nursing school after such a legacy?
It was a diploma program. So I'm sure you're aware of, magnet status and the push for the bachelor nurse, and a diploma program was the best nursing schools. I mean, I'll say that debatably, but within week 2 you're doing clinicals. So it was OJT education. You're hands-on clinical from day one. You're carrying full assignments by your graduation, and it was just targeted nursing education. But the demise of all those diploma programs was the proliferation of the ideology that you have to have a degree to be better. And I disagree with that on many levels. And there's some of the smartest people I know don't have initials behind their name, but the push for that kind of negated that whole diploma program. So it was that it's gone.
That's so sad to hear. And it's funny because
Mhm.
in the fire service, there's been a big push for degrees when it comes to promotion. And
Yep,
if higher education created better leadership, then we wouldn't have a recruitment crisis. And we
100%
wouldn't be
correct.
losing first responders left, right, and center to physical and mental health issues. So
Yeah,
clearly, a degree alone is not the be all end all when it comes to
no,
EMS or first responder professions.
no, you're 100% correct. So, but yeah, I mean, and what else you want to know about that part?
Well, let's go back to volunteering, because I've had a few people on now that have done
Mhm.
volunteer EMS specifically.
Yep.
Firstly, as we sit here now in our 50s and you have a pretty, mature journeyman's lens in the whole world of
Mhm.
EMS, what is your perspective of people that young entering, especially kind of fire EMS side, and then getting to kind of witness some of the horrors that we do at such a young age?
Yes. So I do have quite a kind of a bipolar view of that, in the fact that one, it for me, it offered opportunities that never would have arisen. I have no idea what I would have done. It gave me a channel and an outlet and a group of friends that got my sense of humor, or did my sense of humor develop out of those group of friends? It gave me camaraderie. It gave me purpose, particularly in a small town that's, people can get stuck in a cycle. Uh, but you're 100% correct. I mean, just Sunday, the bitter side of a young entering that field is we're sitting outside. It's beautiful weather, Easter Sunday. My wife and I are waiting for our daughter to arrive, and I'm like, huh, I saw my first gunshot wound in fatality when I was 15 years old on Easter Sunday, left upper chest. Like, that's not normal,
No.
and here I am, 51, and that just pops into my head, and then so it takes a toll. Does it mature you prematurely? I guess mature is a weird word, but it definitely exposes that seedier side of the world that most people are shrouded from. So it takes a toll. I'd lie to you if I tell you it didn't. So I think the volunteer aspect is great. It's sad that it's dwindling, um, but there's got to be a better way.
I feel like at that age, that's a beautiful time for a mentorship type program. So you're exposed to the
Mhm.
profession without being front and center of these unending traumas. But when you
Yes.
listen to the neuroscientists, the developing brain, I mean, I would argue that 18 is too young for a fire and EMS.
Yeah.
To be honest, law enforcement does 21. I think that would actually be a better one, because then that gives
Yeah.
a young person 3 years to whether they want to go further their academic journey or spend a few years in the trades and get some kind of life skills under them first. But yeah, I mean, when we know now that the brain is simply not developed yet to pour
Yeah.
on the level of trauma that we see in a lot of cities and suburban communities, I think it's really
Yeah.
irresponsible now that we have the knowledge.
I agree. And the downside is when we talk about how do you cultivate and mentor someone into a position without exposing to the trauma, there's the side of that where it says, okay, I'm grooming you for this, but I'm not letting you peek behind the curtain yet. And now you might have someone who's convinced that's what they want to do, and then they get there and they feel maybe it's too late to back out and find something different. I don't think there's an easy answer to that, but you're right. I mean, neuroscientifically, it's proven that we're just not ready.
Well, I think we can apply the same thing even to any crew. Like, for example, I wrote about it in my first book, but I had one of the deadliest days. It was my last shift in Orange County, and it wasn't why I left. I'd already put my papers in. But the second of the three was a homeless woman that was missing for a few days. And we start going through the woods in Orlando and get to a point like, okay, that smells like someone who's been missing for a few days. So everyone else, I'm like, I'll go check. You guys just go back. And the same thing happened to me when I was a young firefighter. Like the whole crew doesn't need to see it. And I think you could apply that. Yeah, there's going to be some scenes where a younger person maybe might, get exposed to it, but you work as a mentor to minimize that. If there's a horrific
Yeah.
fire or something, no, you're not going in to go, look at the crispy critters inside. You're
Yeah.
just going to stay out here. But I think that's a good philosophy. It doesn't matter if it's your first day on the job or the last day on the job. There's no medals for seeing the most shit. There just aren't.
But there used to be these unspoken, I'm going home with blood on my, if my uniform isn't bloody, it wasn't a good shift. And it's nice to see that that's changed. It's changing. But yeah, you're right. I mean, you can't unsee those things. And more importantly, how many people see those things that aren't ready for them and don't have the ability to process that or know how to process it or find someone to process that with, and then it just eats away at them. And we've seen that all too often.
Absolutely. Well, staying on, your small town before we progress
Mhm.
through your career,
Yeah.
another thing that I never experienced really, because I never really lived in the actual neighborhood that I served. Even, at the closest I was still about 15 miles away. And then most of the time I
Yeah.
was 70 miles away. But, I still, when I visit those towns, I'm like, oh yeah, that was the dead hooker in the dumpster. And yeah, that was a gangbanger hanging out of his car and da da da. I mean,
Yeah.
we all know what that feels like.
Hmm.
But when you hear the volunteers, you have two things. Firstly, the spouses or the family members of volunteers have said, well, when the pager goes off, we don't know what they're going to or if they're going to come back. Whereas when we go to work on a shift, we're not responding to a call. In a quiet
Yeah.
department, you may not even get a call. Unlikely, but it's possible. But the other thing is you're running on your friends, you're running on your teachers, on your sports coaches, on your pastors. So when you look back now, let's just kind of be a voice for the volunteers and other people that work in those small communities, because I think that's another layer that most of us don't experience that live outside where we work.
Yeah. It's tough. After volunteering, I'll get back to your question in a half a second, is once I became a nurse and I went and worked in a big inner city trauma center, I vowed I would never work in a hospital that was the same place that I live because of that. You know, it it particularly if you're younger and volunteer and when you do CPR on somebody's grandfather or father, or you go into domestic violence, it's very difficult on any given day to kind of process that. But when you repeatedly see these people, I think there needs to be a very healthy mental health aspect of it, or more importantly, like a more formalized debriefing process. In Granted, this was quite a time ago, but that volunteer agency didn't have those debriefs. If they did, it was for something that was profoundly catastrophic. But I think those need to happen more often, particularly in a small volunteer community, where it's okay. You're going to run into these people. You're going to see them, like you said, at the grocery store, at schools, at the gas station, and initially, it's this kind of avoidance. I don't want to, but there needs to be mentorship and guidance on how to approach that. There's the HIPAA, and it blurs in small towns when volunteerism happens. I don't have the answer for you of what's the best way. I do know that turning a blind eye to it for those volunteers, those explorer programs, educating them up front that this is the reality of it, that there has to be a way that we need to openly discuss this. We have a hotline. Let's, whatever the case is. And in the town I grew up in, it was a segregated volunteer fire, volunteer EMS. So it almost had this little underscore of tension and betterment of either, but more of that cohesive. Let's talk about that car accident together. Let's, yeah, there's just the debriefing process of being okay, openly discussing in a private manner, and how do we deal with that moving forward because we're going to run into something.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've said this
Yeah.
many times. The ego that is involved, that the person or the department, or really the person, we're talking about, people that have created a culture where, oh, city's better than county, or oh, we don't talk to PD, in
Yeah,
an environment where the only way that you're going to serve your community properly is to have interagency relationships is unacceptable. And then you think about, well, if that culture is proliferated as far as looking down your nose at other departments, then what is it like when it comes to the mental health conversation? I guarantee you, if you've got an arrogant fire department, you're going to see a very toxic culture when it comes to mental health. And then if you look behind the curtain at the alcoholism and the addiction and the suicides, I guarantee you there's a linear relationship there.
100% agree with that. Yes, in my career, I've worked medical device for several different companies, and I had the really the honor to go behind the scenes of a lot of fire departments, huge, small, rural, inner city, and seeing that little peek behind the curtains of other departments and the cultures and how it follows. Yeah, you're right, spot on.
So, what was it that took you towards the nursing side as opposed to the paramedic side?
Um, Opportunity and money. So in the state of Connecticut, back then, which I actually enjoy that process, you had to be an EMT for X amount of time before you can be an EMT intermediate, before you can take your paramedic. So, you gained experience along each way, and then you were kind of culminated in where you can take a paramedicine course and get that paramedic certificate. Um, right out of high school, I could go and in 2 years be an RN making more money from a 2-year diploma program than the graduated paramedic program. And then as a nurse, I can sit for the paramedic exam. So there that kind of unfolded along the way. But the catalyst was, I don't have a nest egg. I'm 18 years old. I need to make money, move out, and nursing was a very, very, very viable career route. Um, so that was what led to it, and pretty ballsy at the time. St. Francis was the school to apply to, and it was the only school I applied to. Just luckily got in. So, but yeah, and then afterwards, that EMS side doesn't leave you. Like, it's there. I remember working in the trauma center at Hartford at St. Francis Hospital, and just still looking at the medics coming and going, I'm here all night, and who knows if they're going to go back, they're going to go, it's just a different. I don't regret my nursing background at all, and that's why I continued and went, paramedicine, and was lucky enough to combine both of them in flight, and that was phenomenal. So
What was your experience in the trauma side? Because you, like you mentioned, you were from a smaller town.
yeah,
And we all know that a lot of the bad stuff comes to the trauma center, and you're exposed
yeah,
to a lot more of the dark side of society through that route as
yeah.
well. So, talk to me about that experience.
Yeah, country mouse gets to the city. That's exactly what that was. The only time I went to the big trauma centers are if I was lucky enough to ride in, as like a third party where they're, taking someone in, or I got to fly in one of the helicopters, Lifestar, when we had a motorcycle crash. But it was just, it's chaos when you go in there and you open your eyes and you don't, I'm used to the small little hospital where everyone knows everybody. And so when I got the job there, it was mind blowing. It was mind blowing not only to see the true knife and gun club, if you remember that book from way back in the day, like it was. I mean, that hospital had 96 guards, two attack dogs. It had a full time officer in triage. Um, it had gone through several periods where riots happened, where staff members got assaulted. It was a time that they couldn't take the attack dogs into the hospital because they can't differentiate staff from perpetrator or whatever. It was just this weird, dirty, and I worked 9P to 9A. It was a horrible shift, so you saw everything. But a lot of the themes I think you have is about mentorship, and I had a phenomenal mentor. So I had this nurse, Candy Fusco. She was phenomenal. She was just as I don't know how to say it delicately, seasoned. She was seasoned, but newer stuff, down cold, and that was my mentor. And I remember I started, I'm like, I really don't like pediatric patients. It's not my strong suit. Every single pediatric patient that comes in, Erik gets them. I don't care if it's a sniffle sneeze. I don't care if it's multi-system trauma. Erik gets every pediatric patient. And I did relentlessly until the point where I am like, all right, another kid, cool. I'm okay with pediatric patients now. But she could identify where my deficits were from not seeing that side of the world, and um, also being, male nurses are a subset of the population of nurses. So being the male nurse at night, granted, I'm all of 5'6" on a good day. I'm not very intimidating, but you're still called when that happens. I had 2 guns pulled on me in that emergency department. That was that was new. I've never felt so helpless and angry at the same time. Like, how dare you take that away from me? And I have nothing to do. I did break one of the guy's thumbs. I feel a little bit bad about that, but and it was just out of malice because he had a gun in my face, and that could have ended me. But there was a lot of growing up quickly in that particular trauma center. The experience was unparalleled to this day. It was great, but eye opening.
I can imagine. What was the environment like then? I came into the fire service in 2004 into Hialeah, which is basically one of the suburbs of Miami. So again, country mouse goes to the city,
Yeah,
and just insane. And you were holding the
yeah,
wall for hours and hours and hours. And the irony is, when COVID happened, people were acting like that was a thing that only happened in COVID. I'm like, whoa, time out. Let's have you
yeah,
listened to the people that work in the inner cities in the hospitals? But that was, more recently than you're talking about. Back then,
yeah.
was that still an issue as far as, waiting for beds and that kind of thing?
Yes, yes. So the commonplace, as it is sadly today, is the hall bed. And the ongoing I poke fun at the rivalry, the ICU ED nurse. The thousands of memes that are out there. But just because I had a 4-bed assignment didn't mean I still didn't have 5 hall beds. And if you had the trauma room or the code room, so it happened a lot. It was paper charting back then too. We just started to get EHR, so it was a whole different world. And the ideology that the nurses eat their young, it was very true there. You for lack of a better term, you man up or you get out. And the shift that I worked and how relentless it was. I remember walking in, and at 9 p.m. in an inner city on a weekday or weeknight, doesn't matter, it's packed to the gills. And I remember every shift I walked in, and someone would invariably look at me, "You don't want to be here. You don't want to be here." I know I don't want to be here, but that's not the first thing I want to hear when I walk in, except for one nurse, Mary, and she would smile and say, "I'm so glad you're here to help." But there's always a little ray of sunshine in there somewhere. But yeah, it was still the same, jam packed, fighting for beds.
What was, excuse me, the culture back then? You're in a profession that is usually more female, so you have a
Mm-hmm.
little bit of that feminine kind of input. When it comes to the mental health conversation, was there more empathy back then, or did it parallel what we saw in first responder professions?
Mm, I think it's a little different. I think as a male nurse, the perspective's a little bit different too, because you go in and regardless of the nurse that you are, you're new in an environment. They're unsure of you. What's your skill set? Are you the gossiper? Are you the helper? Are you what? Who are you? First off, are you competent or are you lazy? Or once they figure that out, we had a really tight knit group in that emergency department that worked nights. So, I mean, the commonplace was we almost developed this unofficial post shift debrief. We would all go to this diner and we would sit down and we would discuss generically the night, and it was usually the physician was there and the entire nurses. So it was a as hard as it was very nurturing at the end too. So we did a lot of group activities, which today's difficult to do with. I don't know why it's so difficult, to be honest with you. I just don't see it as much. Maybe I'm blinded to it, but it was like it was a so that was your family. It's like you're on shift for 24 hours in a fire department. That's your family, or a helicopter, or whatever. In this, it was like having an extended family, and then we would do weekend events together and support each other. So yeah, it was very supportive. It was very supportive right up into the time I said I'm going travel nursing, and then it was like cold steel.
Is that heresy in the world of nursing then?
I guess so. Yeah, there was a lot of resentment when I said I was leaving.
Kind of moving forward a little bit, have you seen the show on HBO Max, The Pit, that's come out?
Yes, yes.
Talk to me about it. I mean, I think it's phenomenal. I think
So
technically it's been great, and it's certainly brought a lot of the issues to the front. But what's your
it
perspective
is
of it?
it is the most true to life show out there, down to the procedures, the thought processes behind them. Granted, my wife doesn't necessarily like. I'm sure, like you probably like. Okay, well, they're going to do this. They should do that. That why they put him on iPad? He's going to have a pneumo. It's like, but but the light on the behind the scenes stuff, the administration, the push for Press Ganey scores, the violence that's so prevalent yet so overlooked. It's spot on. And that show taking place now, it's like I'm back at work at St. Francis in 1997. It hasn't changed, sadly.
Yeah, and this is. I just did a video today. I think we were talking about it before we record, and it was
Mhm,
on cowardice, and how, and I'll
mhm,
put it on our generation. We've
yeah,
just kind of rolled over when it comes to all the things that need to be fixed that haven't. Whether it is simply create courage in a fire department to change the work week so our men and women stop dropping like flies, or whether it's having the courage to stand in the middle and say, hey, during COVID, obesity was kind of a big contributing factor. Are we going to address the national obesity crisis? But the fact that, as you're talking about now, and in the fire service, the mandatory overtime, when I worked at Orange County, I was hit with it all the time. That was almost 20 years
yeah,
ago.
yeah,
So this is, these are powerful perspectives now. And the Pit did such a great job of showing that, and even touching on the Freedom House, the original paramedics
yeah,
out of
yeah,
Pittsburgh that were
yeah.
African
That
American.
was great.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So, I think it's phenomenal. And this is why I'm going to make Kinder into a show, because now it's like, all right, well, who are these people that are bringing these patients in? Let's go into their
yeah,
world now, and then let's
yeah,
expand, because they touched on the mental health a little bit, but
yeah,
very, very superficially. So I feel like now we're beautiful. Let's jump in with both feet and talk about
yeah,
the mental health side in all these professions, including doctors and
yeah.
nurses.
So I guess, and feeding on that, let's talk about that one episode briefly where the charge nurse, she gets physically assaulted, and I guess what I was hoping to see out of that was, yes, it was addressed. You need to go home, but then she just picks up and keeps on working like nothing happened. And I guess I look at that from two different viewpoints. Is okay, yep, I got it. The duty, the job's there, the patient's just still coming in, and then you have this horrific mass casualty. Take that out of it, but there was a. I don't think there was a more enough to say, look, let's talk for a second. Let's. And you're exactly right. Like that could be a whole episode of itself. Of how do we deal with that? Is it right to stay? Is it wrong to stay? There's that was an interesting. What was your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, the thing, and also, like you said, the takeaway is like, oh, you should just suck it up and stay at the ER, rather than,
Yeah,
no, 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 this guy needs to be hunted down right now. She would do a police report. If she had the injuries
correct.
they suggested she had, she physically would not be able to carry on with the shifts. So there was that. And of course, it's what they call it, poetic license, in the same way as they're relaying all the procedures they're about
Yeah,
to do. I get that,
right,
but at the end it was like, oh, I've got a counselor. You should talk to him. Oh, okay, opens beer.
right.
It's like, okay, we can definitely build on that. But you didn't need to go there in that show. That show was such a great
Yeah,
entry to all these other conversations now. So
yeah,
I thought it was absolutely phenomenal. And then technically, like you said, I was actually like, oh, okay, I got that right, because like
yeah,
you were saying,
yeah,
oh,
yeah,
you shouldn't do that. It's going to cause this, and it did.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
turned to my wife all proud, and she doesn't give a shit, but
Yeah.
but I called it.
That was cool. So yeah, I guess when you look at a show let me ask your advice on this. So if you have a show that's so true to life, there are some inaccuracies, and they do have post cut, speak with, talks with the actors. Do you think it would behoove producers of a show like that to say, look, here's a real ER doc and a real ER nurse that work in a situation like that. What's your perspective on this show? And they can say, this is right, this is great, but realistically, this probably should happen. I don't know. Does it detract from the sensationalization, or do you pepper in reality?
So that's what I'm hoping to do with Kinder, is there will be two things. There'll be
Yeah,
the actual story, and then there'll be something parallel that will have real people. So it
yeah,
goes, you get pulled in like, hey, that wasn't fiction, what you were watching. But here's real people, and it's more raw, and it's infusing hope in all these issues that we brought up, that
yeah,
overcoming obesity and addiction and all these other areas. Like, here are people struggling, here are solutions, here's what they're doing now. So I think, yeah, there's an amazing opportunity to blend. Like,
yeah,
some of these behind the scenes documentaries are amazing. Like The Fall Guy, if you ever watched that with the stunts, awesome, great documentary. And it's like, oh,
yeah.
now I really appreciate the stunts that I saw, because now I understand what it took to do them,
Mhm.
whilst they went
And you
through
did them.
COVID, by the way. Yeah. So
Yeah,
so I think that's it. Is if you can blend the two
yeah,
together, whatever your storytelling is, if there can be a kind of, all right, now that was the story, but let's talk
yeah,
exactly. Let's talk to the real people.
yeah,
Then I think that it really pulls people in even more, and then it stops them from just going, okay, that was fun. That was a
yeah.
fictional journey. Now let me get on with my life. It's like, oh, no, no, no. The hospital down the road that you're hoping the bed is open when you have a stroke. That is what that's going to be like, and you might be sitting in
Yeah,
the hallway with a medic for 2 hours.
yeah, yeah. I guess that's why I do miss the show Trauma Life in the ER, because when that came out back in the day, I remember the first episode that I watched. I was working night shift in the trauma center, and I felt exhausted after watching the episode. I'm like, his pager goes off again, and you've ran shifts like that where you just get, okay, all the paperwork's done. I'm all in bed. Back again. It just, it's that one more. It's that one more. Um, yeah, where it showed the kind of raw element. So great job with you coming up with that. I think it'll be great.
Yeah, well, hopefully. All right. Well, you talked about announcing to your fellow
Hmm.
nurses that you were going to start traveling, and that was,
Yeah.
you're out of the tribe by that point. So, where did that adventure take you?
So it all started with, the typical words. I met a girl. So she was a travel nurse, and my wife now, Sharon. But she's working in one of the units, and she had a friend in the emergency department that was a travel nurse also. So we were introduced a couple of times, and every time she came in to see me, we were like, had a fresh trauma coming in. So I'm gloved, I'm gowned, I'm masked, I'm ready for it. I'm like, hey, I don't, hi, it's not, I didn't, it wasn't the right time. But she perceived it as, this guy's just a dick. Every time I come down, it's this brush off wave. Who are you trying to? And then one night we went out and just hit it off. And, you know, I was young. I was 23, 22. I just built a house. I was living in that. And then she's Canadian. So she's like, let's go travel. I'm like, let's go travel. And that was a huge step for me because I never left Connecticut. My family was there. It was almost like you don't leave your family. I was making good money as a nurse. I was supporting my parents a lot. So when I left, it created a ripple effect, not only at work with the tribe, so to speak. Once they found that I was leaving, it was, you're dead to me. All for a girl, you're going to regret it. But my family took it hard because the meal ticket was leaving, um, which is just a whole other story on that one. But so my wife, my now wife, and I went and just did travel assignments. And I remember the first travel assignment we did was at Pocono Medical Center in the Poconos in Pennsylvania, in East Stroudsburg. And if you've ever been there, is was the old, that's the fun in the sun in the Poconos, and it was the honeymoon place. It was different back then. Small emergency department, and I remember I was shitting bricks. And my wife back then, she's looking, she's like, "What the fuck are you doing?" Like, I'm studying, I got all my books over. I'm like, I gotta be a big game. I mean, I'm leaving St. Francis. I don't know these people, they don't know me. And it took such an anxiety on me that I would underperform at this emergency department that I didn't know anybody at. And she's like, stop. And then it hit me. I'm sitting there one night and I'm going, well, let's wait a minute. So if somebody comes in with CHF, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z at St. Francis. If somebody comes in with CHF, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z in the Poconos. Okay. Okay. I'm doing it to myself. But then I realized too, and you've probably seen this from different fire departments, different agencies, emergency departments. So I get to this department and like everyone's the same. There's the same personality with a different name and face. Oh,
100%.
you're Candy. Oh, you're Joe. Okay, I get it. There's the dynamics. I got it now. Let's go on our way. And then we traveled for 2.5 years and got to Las Vegas. She wanted to get married in Vegas. I wanted to get married in Vegas. We said, let's do a travel assignment out there and we'll just invite a small group of family and friends to come have a big party in Vegas, no gifts, and then we'll have a great time. But as I was a travel nurse in an emergency department there, Sunrise Hospital, um, the flight crew came in and I had a stroke patient, had a lateral uncle hemorrhage, and I'm giving the assessment. I'm doing a Babinski and saying, I can see it's a right, uncle hemorrhage there. You can see this, blah, blah, blah. And the flight nurse went back to her boss and said, you need to call this guy. And back then, like that's how it worked. And a bulk of the flight programs is you either recruited from in or you saw them in the emergency departments. And then that's how, 2 kids, 2 dogs, and 5 years later, we were in Vegas.
So talk to me about that transition then. I mean, the role of a flight nurse now, very, very different than an ER with all the experts and
Yeah,
equipment around you.
it was amazing. It was amazing, again, to go back to mentorship. So the program director was Dave Usher, and she was one of the founders of Colorado's Flight for Life program. She was the OG flight nurse back in the day. And she used to always say, I haven't been on a helicopter in years, but, you give me enough morphine and Valium, I can intubate anybody. So I can still
Is
do
that
the
for
job.
her or the patient?
Little of each. But they put us through a residency program which was really phenomenal. So they had a ground critical care transport program and the flight program that were kind of separate. So the ground critical care worked for AMR. So you did the critical care transport, but when you were not doing a CCT transport, you were thrown into the 911 system. So you're doing 911 calls and but you got to operate at the level of a flight nurse. So you can do chest tubes and central lines and all this stuff. But even before you got on there, we went through months and months of this residency under the medical direction and the tutelage of Dr. Tom Zinowitz. So Tom Zinowitz was awesome. He was like this big bully from high school that was smart. So he went to med school, but he still just kind of talked tough, knew his shit, and but he was awesome. He was so in favor of raising the bar on nursing standards. So he picked the physicians we would go to. When we were in the hospital, we as the crew members would do every central line, every intubation, every chest tube, anything invasive we did. We had to catalog those every month. And if you couldn't get them, again, this doesn't exist in the world, and I'm not sure if it was quite legal back then, but the coroner was right across the street. So we had this little tackle box, and we go over there, and we had this relationship with them. The medical examiners would teach us, anatomy in theirs, but in reciprocation, we would be able to do all these invasive procedures in the backhand of that of getting them blood samples from the central lines and whatever. So we had a phenomenal amount of experience, that hands-on, that repetitive motion of being able to do a chest tube in the dark, the minimal equipment that you need, and practicing all those skills. And then when you're in the hospital, you're doing your trauma rotations with the trauma surgeon, the OB, like everything was just months and months and months of that before they said, okay, you're ready. Then they threw you on the ground. Then they threw you in the helicopter. And it was awesome. I mean, a good year of my life, I sat up, in that bunker at nights going, I gotta be ready for the call. Gotta be ready for the call. And then there's that old mantra that's echoing in the back. It's not your emergency. it's their emergency that you're going to be part of and help. But that transition was awe-inspiringly overwhelming. So
I think the LA chief got that a little mixed up when she was saying, well, it's his fault getting himself in the fire. I think she
yeah,
she
and
misquoted that a little bit. But you're right. I mean, you have to think of it that
yeah,
way. You're there to help
yeah,
in an emergency. You can't get consumed by the fact that it is one.
yeah, and that was a tough pill to swallow. Um, but then, you know, talking to the flight crews out there, and especially now when we transition, I remember we had a new flight nurse in Tampa. We'll get there, but it was a couple of weeks in, and I said, "Well, let's go over some scenarios." She goes, "Oh, I've been doing this for 2 weeks now." I'm like, "Oh, well, I'm sorry, professor," but like that was the mindset. Like, I've been doing this for 2 weeks now. Like, it should be a good year before you feel comfortable with that amount of power for good and evil when you give this advanced scope to somebody. So, but yeah,
100%. What was some of the career calls you remember in that role?
in Las Vegas,
Or just I mean, in
gosh,
the flight program, full stop.
oh, I mean, so there's the calls that people want to hear when they ask you, tell me about your calls. I think um, one of the most horrific scenes, actually, how do you quantify horrific? So one of them was this woman was wrapped in a towel, a blanket, poured of gasoline, lit on fire by her boyfriend, and kicked in the front lawn. And we land on scene, and she's still smoldering, and she's third degree. She's full thickness burn, head to toe. Her fingers are burned off, her toes are burned off. She's just full scar on her face. She needs an airway, she needs access, she needs medication. And she's just sitting there, and I put in a subclavian line, and we were oriented a new medic, and he needs to get the airway. And as he's getting that prep, and I got the line, and she's just going, kill me, kill me, just over and over. And these are one of those calls. I use it for an ethics call course that I'll talk about. So I can't feel a pulse. I can't get a blood pressure. I got a subclavian line in, and I empty every narcotic and benzo that I have in her. Right or wrong? Don't know. Got an airway. Was she breathing? Don't know. She's paralyzed, and I gave her everything. So I always put that question back on whoever I'm talking to. Is that the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do? Is there a right or wrong in that? And how do I defend that when my medical director asks, or how the family asks? So that's one of the most horrific calls, because it blurs the lines of not only technical ability, how do you process someone begging you to die, but you want to make them as comfortable as possible, knowing no matter what you do, kind of like that pit call with that burn patient, gonna die. Like, this is 100% burn. I'm gonna make them as comfortable as possible. So, so that one stands out.
I had a very similar call. We had it was the same day. I had 3 deaths that day. The third one, I don't know if it was a suicide attempt, arson gone wrong, but there was a fully involved house. A young man came running out, still on fire. The first unit that got there, they actually put the. I think it was a neighbor put him out with a hose. The first medic that got there, he was leaning, steaming against a chain link fence, and I actually heard on the radio him asking for help. So rather than go to the fire itself, we went round the back and met the other medic, and ended up doing a standing takedown on the backboard, getting him over this fence. I jumped in the back with the other medic, and off we went. And the trauma center was literally not even 10 minutes around the corner. And so I'm ready to intubate, and we don't do RSI, or didn't in that county. So, assuming that he's out, and
Yeah,
my partner, almost out of habit, like we always do. So, what's your name? And the guy replied as clear as day. And just to reiterate, his nose was gone, his tongue was gone, fingers, genitalia, like third degree burns from head to toe. Just the soles of his feet weren't, because that's what he was standing on. And spoke to me clear as day. And you talk about helpless. You got a guy that burned. All I can do, and I think we put an IO in the end, but all you can do is put a burn sheet over him and a non-rebreather, because he's talking to me and I can't do RSI.
yeah,
So but I've never seen an example. And I wrote about this in my first book. I've never seen a more powerful example of when, if people believe in the soul, when the body is dead and the soul doesn't realize it. So we go wheel him into the ER, and you can imagine the looks when we've got this burn patient with a non-rebreather. Like, what the fuck are these people doing? And I'm like, ask him something. And he said the same thing, clear as we're talking now. And just everyone's jaw dropped. And, the poor guy passed about an hour later. But it's that feeling of helplessness. What can we do? And I think we definitely, got an IO. I believe that we pushed. I don't know if we even pushed painkillers, because I don't think we are even able to get a pressure on them. So it was just one of those things where, like, all right, let's just get them to the hospital where they can do an internal one, and they can make the right decision,
Yeah.
and we don't kill this guy even more than he's gonna pass away. But it's absolutely, it's the same with those cancer patients, or the 90 whatevers that you're working and you're crushing their ribs. Like, should we
Yeah.
be doing this? Where is that line between, the booklet says this, and the actual compassionate, empathetic human being says, actually, we should probably do that?
Yeah. Yeah. Tom Zinowitz, that medical director, he was always very supportive, and he, again, it's what always stuck in my head is, he's like, I don't care what you do, you better be right, but more importantly, whatever your actions are, you have to be able to explain that to the family. And if I can explain that to the family, then I know I did the right thing. And that's, I think, those are the conversations that need to be mentored for new people getting into this industry, regardless of what it is exactly what you said. How long ago was that burn call for you?
That was 2013, July.
And it eats away at you today because you felt helpless, and what could you do? Like that. It's not the calls that, oh, I did everything and I did. It's did I do enough? How do I sleep at night knowing, should I have given something? Should I have not? So those are those existential questions that also eat away, that contribute to those, all the downstream issues. So yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
had a,
yeah.
a cardiac arrest on a plane just over a year ago. I was in London, about flying home, and we were on the tarmac about to push off to
Mhm.
the runway. And the last patient had kind of, shuffled over and then just collapsed in the aisle. And very long story short, unlike all these news stories where there was 20 cardiologists coming back from zero. No one had even
Yeah,
any emergency medicine.
yeah,
So I ended up running this code, but the poor crew is Virgin Atlantic. They had to ask permission for every single piece of equipment to be released. So the
yeah.
AED, the BVM, oxygen, and their oxygen only went up to, I think it was like 6 liters a
Liters.
minute. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, it was like nothing. There
yeah,
was no med bag. I mean, it was just crazy. So, working it, and then the London Fire Brigade come on, and they're not big on the EMS side. They're very, very basic first responders. And then the medics showed up, ended up dragging them to the galley, carrying on working them. But that was the biggest one of, like, not being able to do enough, because if it had been my crew, this orchestrated, rehearsed,
yeah,
symphony of
yeah,
things would have happened simultaneously. But now
yeah,
I'm on my own with no equipment, wondering,
yeah.
are the compressions right? I've got no capnography. I've got nothing that's going to really help
Right.
me if we're doing it. And then at the end, all right, I'm going to go wash my hands and go back to my seat. So that, I
Oh,
would say, of my whole career, was the most jarring one, because we could have done more. We didn't have the ability really to do it, but were the compressions, fast enough? Were they, and I mean, all these things, you
yeah,
you did everything you could as a good Samaritan by that point, but the professional paramedic in you is like, we could have done so much more. I think he wouldn't have made it. He had that look. I'm the Grim
yeah,
Reaper. Every single code I ever had never made it.
yeah.
I'm just that guy. But
It's
that being said, like you said, if the code went well and you lost them mentally, that's a much better place. But when you know that there were things that should have been done that weren't,
yeah,
that's a horrible thing to take with you.
yeah. It's there. It's another little piece plucked out of your soul. So I'm gonna pepper in something
Please.
about, it's kind of the opposite of that. So I was on a flight from Fort Lauderdale to Atlanta, and I was working for the EZIO, and I was in my scrubs, because that's, we run to the airport and you go. I was large territory, so I'm sitting up toward the front of the plane, and we're in flight, and there's this kid next to me, just just every bit of a shitty kid, jumping, hopping, throwing, biting, spitting, screaming. And the mother just do 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 do. So I'm like, oh. And then you hear over, is there a nurse or doctor on the plane? There's got to be. Just like I said, there's got to be. And here I am in a set of scrubs. And then it comes over again. Is there a nurse or a doctor on the plane? Like with much more impetus in the voice. Because usually it's something that's, benign. Someone's nauseated, someone threw up, somebody spilled something. And then I'm like, all right, I'll get away from this kid anyway. So I hit the call bell, and the flight attendant came over to me, and she's like something's wrong. There's something. So I go walk over, and this woman is unconscious, unresponsive in the seat. And just before this flight, I was working with, I think, Allegiant Air, some one of the flight. They were looking to see if they should get pulse oximetry on these things. They have an EEMK. Are you familiar with an EEMK is?
I am not, no.
Well, a lot of people aren't. So an EEMK is on every American commercial flight. It's an enhanced emergency medical kit. It has everything to run a cardiac arrest, anaphylaxis, like IV, everything. And I was completely unaware of what an EEMK was just until like the week before. So, and here's the funny thing, because you're saying, Virgin Atlantic, or they're asking permission for everything. And apparently, if you just speak authoritatively enough and an acronym, like, so I go over and I just stand up and I look at the flight attendant. I go, "Give me the EEMK stat." Two med bags appear out of nowhere, carte blanche. Open them up, and I ask anyone around, is anyone medicine, nurse? And I'm in nursing school. Here's an IV. Do you know how to spike an IV? Okay, spike that. I find it. I get stuff to start an IV. I'm looking around. I look at assess the patient. Airways open, shallow respirations, got the oxygen on, pinpoint pupils. I'm like, it's an overdose most likely, but let me rule out the others. So I go to I start an IV. I get some blood, and I look at the flight attendant. I'm like, can you call over the intercom and say, ask anyone if they have a glucometer? Okay, glucometer. So she gets on. Does anybody have a glucometer? So I just, big teacher voice. Does anybody have a glucometer? Checking their sugar. Like 3 appear. Check the sugar. It's fine. Most EEMK kits either have Narcan or they don't. This one didn't have Narcan. Patient stops breathing. I get an ambu bag. I start bagging from behind. And the flight attendant comes over and goes, the pilot wants to know if we can divert, if we need to divert. I'm like, how long can we get to Atlanta? Because this is where I know I was a little bit of a piece of shit and traveling too much. I'm like, I don't want to divert. Nobody wants to divert. It's an airway problem. I can maintain the airway. We can bag, good pulse. Everything else is good. We got good vitals. And she's like, we can be on the ground in like 12 minutes. Perfectly acceptable time. No, just go. Priority clearance. I'm like, yes, early arrival to Atlanta. Just a piece of shit.
Get my bags
like,
for me too.
I hate myself that I know that. So anyway, the woman signs up coming around. She took too many Percocets. Her father had died. So she is overdosed a little bit. We'll find up coming back. So Atlanta Fire comes on board, and I got a line, oxygen, all this stuff. And he's like, I can't replace all your medical supplies. I'm like, mine, they're the airlines. They didn't know that they had them. So they escort the lady, take her to the hospital. So the crew's like, hey, can you talk on the phone here? This is our medical director. They kind of want to know what's going on. So I just tell him exactly what I did. And he's like, oh, okay, good. Hang up. And I give him my business card. I was working for Vidacare, and they were out of Texas at the time. But, I lived in Atlanta then. And I remember getting a card in the mail weeks later, and it was from Vidacare. And I open it up, and there's an envelope in there, and it's from the Delta Crew 1739. We want to thank you, for your efforts in this call. Enjoy the basket. Huh. So then there's another envelope. It's from the secretary at Vidacare. Hey, Eric, here's the card from Delta. We ate the basket. So they sent like a meat and cheese basket. So I don't think that would happen this day and age, because I think now it requires a lot more due diligence to release that, much like what happened with you.
Yeah. But actually the
You're right.
EMK, I had that, had a syncopal patient basically, and he dropped, and it was funny because when people say, is there a doctor? There's a lot of different professions where you have the title doctor doesn't mean you actually understand emergency medicine. And I witnessed that. Not being arrogant, I didn't get up at first because all these doctors showed up. then I realized they were probably podiatrists and proctologists and had no idea what they were doing with emergency medicine, or philosophers maybe.
Yeah.
So I ended up doing a full assessment again. But that time they did. I had epi, I mean, everything,
Yeah.
like the whole
Yeah.
gamut. And ironically, when it was actually a cardiac arrest, when I needed all that stuff,
You
it
didn't
was
have it.
nowhere to be found. Yeah. So I applauded the crew. They were phenomenal. They really were. I mean, we had bystanders helping. Let me be very clear. They just weren't, like ER nurses or doctors or anything. But and then the crew after that, a couple of them went home, and I told them that's amazing, good for you for knowing where
Yeah.
where you're at now. And then the rest of
Yeah.
them carried on and served
Yeah.
people after. There's one, she had
Yeah.
28 years as a stewardess, had never had a cardiac arrest, and
Yeah.
that was one of the last ones that she had. I think she kind of transitioned out after. So yeah, getting
Yeah.
to talk to them and let them offload a bit. But yeah, I mean, it was crazy. It really was.
It
So
is. And good for you for doing that. It reminds me, there was an old episode of the show Scrubs, and it was a comedic, thing, but the head guy, who's really a pain in the ass, and he's looking at this doctor through the window, explaining to this family that their loved one is dead, that, despite all of modern medicine and their best efforts, there's nothing they could do to that patient to survive. He's like, and that family's going to be devastated the whole day. And none of them are going back to work, but that doc's going to come out, that medic's going to come out, that flight attendant's going to come out and just go about their day.
mm-hmm.
Like, there's not a lot of professions where they do that. So to underscore, even on an airline level, you're right. That's a horrific event. When that football player dropped and they did CPR and it affected the whole country. Oh my God, it was so traumatizing. Yeah,
Yeah,
it,
it
it,
is.
it
It
is.
sucks.
It is. It sucks. Now wash, rinse, repeat, and then go to the next call or go to the next room and put on the smile and go, "Hey, Johnny, how's the kidney?" It's yeah, we're the best actors in the world, I think.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned earlier about, practicing on cadavers. One of the
Mhm.
best trainings I had in the last place I worked was we did a cadaver lab. Did a bunch of crikes, bunch of needle decompressions. And it's bizarre. If anyone has done it before, I had a torso who the face was wrapped and then it stopped right where the ribs were. So
Yeah,
very, very eerie. No arms, if I remember rightly.
yeah,
So yeah, it's quite an interesting thing, but invaluable for. I mean, I
yeah,
know they use it a lot more in actual physicians and that kind of thing, but from a
yeah, yeah,
paramedic's point of view, and this is towards the end of my career,
yeah.
it was incredible just to go over and over and over again on a
It's
real
practice
real
changing.
person.
It's
Yeah.
practice changing. So when I worked for VitaCare, that even when they sold the Teleflex, we did national cadaver labs, and I've been fortunate enough to have been part of that for almost a decade, and hundreds of these labs. And I'm all about educating up. And just, I don't care if a chest tube is not in your scope of practice. I'm not teaching you to be competent on the chest tube as a nurse or a paramedic, but while you're helping someone who's doing it, now you understand why it might be difficult. You anticipate what needs to be next. But more importantly, how else and where else were you going to be able to operate in an environment of zero consequence? Make the wrong cut, put the airway in the goose, try a new blade, try a new technique. It's consequence free. And that, taking that away versus I'm in the OR, I got to get the intubation, the patient needs, get it in the goose. Try one in the goose in there. Try stuff you wouldn't do. And I agree with you. Some of the most fulfilling moments of my life have been teaching those cadaver labs, because I always learn something, and yeah, I agree. I'm happy that it's more and more available for paramedics, nurses, and not just the physicians.
I'm seeing a push now where I think even chest tubes are being presented as a possibility for
Yeah.
medics in the field.
Yep.
But that's what I found when I got to that point is like, okay, but what's next? Like, how can we
What's
increase our
next?
skills? I'm having Dr. Antevi, the guy behind the Hantevi
Yeah, yeah,
system.
I know.
He's
Yep.
coming
Yeah,
back
I
on
know.
again. We're talking about whole blood. I mean, there's all these
Yeah.
innovations, but my career, it was kind of like, no, this is all we do. This is our scope of practice. But then where are
Right.
areas, I mean, even like field amputations. I know it sounds crazy, but
Yeah.
who is there at the
No.
time while the person's entrapped?
Correct.
It's the medics.
Correct.
You allow us to cut people's throats open,
Yeah.
then give the education so you can safely, remove a limb so you can get that person out to the hospital before they bleed to death. So I love these
So
conversations where they're pushing the parameters out in the paramedic world.
I spoke about this before with someone else. So with Antevi and Shepke and Paul Pepe and all the Eagles. So, I mean, you're familiar with that group. They're medical directors of all kind of the big EMS agencies. So they get together once a year and they really try to have this evidence-based push, just what you're saying. So, Whole Blood was kind of a baby of the Broward County medical director, and it's usually born out of tragedy. You know, he lost his niece in an accident in Florida, and she was just over salinized, and it really hurt him. So he's like, whole blood, and that Eagle network helps each other's initiatives. And you're right. What starts out as this blasphemous thing, you know, only a nurse, two nurses, and double verification, and to get this blood, it doesn't exist anymore. There's safety parameters, but why? Why were we neglecting some very smart people because they didn't have the right initials after their name? But the training is there. The evidence is there, and you're right. That stigma is going away, but more importantly, it's difficult to replicate that. So you can have Broward counties carrying whole blood, but how do I get, Bartow Fire to do that? You know what I mean? They don't have the budget to do that. Their medical direction is not unified. Their medical director might be more of a paper medical director than an involved medical director and may not want the legalities of that. So that's the bigger question that I have is how do we take these phenomenal ideas and these practices, finger thoracotomies, just what you say, and how does that become standard of care financially
Mm-hmm.
and legally?
I think, I mean, even when you talk about a lot of deliveries of service, or even say, having a nutritionist and a strength and conditioning coach, if you are in
Yeah.
Miami-Dade or LA, yeah, you're going to have
Yeah.
multiple because you've got
Hmm.
the budget, you've got the number of people. Let's say now you're in, like you said, a smaller area where it's more, towns and that kind of thing. Well, that's when you come together. And I think Anaheim, when I worked there in California, they had networks. So where we trained was called NorthNet, and that was Anaheim's training
Hmm.
tower. But we would train with Fullerton and Orange and all the
Yeah.
surrounding departments. And so, yeah, if you yourself aren't big enough for this thing, then
Yeah.
again, we're talking about humility. So as a medical director, have the humility to actually work with the agencies around you so that you can share blood. Like one of the people I was talking to recently said the blood is actually on the helicopters where they are.
Yeah.
So, it doesn't have to actually be on every rig. If you can't make that work in your municipality, then get it on all your helicopter transport. So at least as soon as they get there, now you can start giving blood. Okay, that's another great alternative if you're not in a
But have
highly
a
densely
backup,
populated.
right? But have a backup when it's bad weather and they can't fly.
Oh, 100%.
The
Exactly.
the
Critical care.
contingents on that. But yeah, and the critical care paramedicine has really, really legitimized, I think, EMS, in a great way. So I don't mean to detract from that, but yeah, you're right. The whole blood initiative and educating up, I'm glad it's happening. Like that's a great thing about EMS is it's not stagnant. It keeps evolving in a good way. And yeah, and ego's a bastard. You're right. The ego has killed a lot of patients, and it's not the clinician's ego. It's someone higher up the chain that's afraid or doesn't whatever the motive is to not propel forward. Not an early adopter, a late adopter, or a non-adopter.
I know you worked in the kind of medical equipment side as well. Before we
Hmm.
jump into some of the innovations that you're excited about,
Yeah.
what is your perspective on backboarding? Because there's just some things that are true. Like, for example, a car fire is a class B fire. It's oil, it's tires, it's plastic seats. That should not be water. That's foam or smother it. But yet, since I was taught in school, it was always just flow water. Makes no sense to me. And then backboarding, we all know that when you strap someone to a board, they slide around like a Russian on an ice rink, and it just doesn't make any sense. It just does not make any sense. And then they're uncomfortable. You got the elderly with the
Yeah.
scoliosis, and then
Yeah.
positionally, some of them can't breathe. So that's what I've seen observationally through my career. And you've heard even that there was no real research to support backboarding in the first place. So what has been, you've got a much longer career than I had. What is your perspective on immobilization in EMS?
I think there are certain situations where it necessitates immobilization. Hands down, cardiac arrest on the third floor, fourth floor, whatever. Just so take that out of it. Your Where you can clear a C-spine in the field, fine. Like I don't see why that's not like you can't do that. Why there's not more of a case. I honestly think it's also perpetuated because that's just the way that it's been done. Like that's the cool thing in medic school and EMT school. Let's strap you to the board and hold you upside down, and we got all these clips, and it's part of it. So I guess I'm not a big fan of backboarding for all the aforementioned things that you'd said. Yes, they create these pediatric boards that scoop out the head, but there's nothing for the obese patient. There's nothing for, it makes intubation difficult. There's so many more benefits to being able to have somebody mobile, particularly, and let's go way back, 48 minutes ago, and we're talking about sitting in the emergency department in the hallway. You're on a backboard, how long before the decubitus starts? It is uncomfortable. And if they have to pee, and how efficacious is it? What is the risk benefit of doing that physically, emotionally, and mentally for your patients? So
Yeah, and what the
I don't have the
physicians
right
do.
answer.
Well, it's just interesting because
Yeah.
what the physicians do to clear them, like you said, it's not medical level stuff. It's basic stuff.
No,
So,
it is a physical assessment. So if they don't have the mental capacity to pass that physical assessment, okay, yeah, I can argue with using it. You're erring on the side, but
mhm.
where do we draw that error? So
Well, I think it goes back to courage, like we were talking about before.
yep,
That paralysis by analysis, this fear of litigation that's paralyzed,
yeah,
a lot of agencies, a lot of medics. And
yeah,
I refuse to. I was like, you know what? I'm
yeah,
like you just said earlier. If you're doing the right thing and you can explain it to the patient, then you shouldn't be terrified of some, court case or whatever. If you did everything like you were
yeah,
supposed to do, then you're good. But
correct.
but this whole fear of, oh, what if, oh, we got to take
Yeah,
everyone to the hospital because what if there was this one time? It's like, all
yeah,
right, but then they can call us back if things get worse.
yeah,
But right now they
correct.
don't want to go, and we're not seeing anything that warrants an ER visit. So
Yeah,
I'm good with
yeah,
it. They signed the
yeah.
signature, off we go. Even though, again, those tough
Right.
book
You
signatures
gave them
wouldn't stand up in court.
an articulated, educated response to why, and they agreed with you.
hmm
But yeah, what if, and this is always how we done it, are just daggers out
Yeah,
there.
because again,
So
it's courage. Like an agency saying,
yeah,
if you do everything right and someone comes after you, we've got your back, and we don't hear that.
correct.
We don't.
Not enough.
No.
No, no. Yeah,
All right. Well, let's talk about medical innovation. So you've worked with
yeah.
that for a long time. What are some of the
hmm
innovations that you've seen that you're really excited about?
So I have to go back to my baby, which is the Easy IO. So when I was flying in Florida, my wife does research for her work. She got recruited to Emory for neurology research, and she had some family there. And I'm like, absolutely, you supported me through my career. Let's go up there. I can pick up a flight job there. I'll still fly in Florida. But as the stars aligned, the chief flight nurse I was working with here in Tampa, she was working with Dr. Larry Miller and VitaCare and this handful of first people hired for the development and hopefully the perpetuation of the Easy IO. But you got to understand, back in then, now I started with 2006 with them. IO was a blasphemous word. It was the last thing you ever did for a dead or dying kid. That's it. Or you have some jockey, military guy doing a sternal IO because it's, like it's got a shock factor to it. But it was not remotely standard of care unless it was a pediatric patient, and it's the last thing you ever did. So Michelle asked me, her name is Michelle Mo, smart woman, but she asked me up in Atlanta, she needed an educator, so I came on board. And yeah, like before that we were just doing peripheral lines, and if you were lucky enough in a flight crew you can do a central line, which was not very common. But other than that, you just poked and poked and poked and prayed that you can get vascular access. If that wasn't the case, again, out of tragedy comes innovation. And that's what led Dr. Miller to develop the EZ-IO. Is he had a friend who was a fire chief in Texas who just exsanguinated because they couldn't get vascular access. And it dug at him to the core that he lost his friend because they just couldn't get an IV. So he found a drill in his father's workshop and toyed around with it. And that's where, that came from. But when I got brought on board, there's about 15 of us, and trying to convince the country to drill a needle into your bone or into the bone of a person, adult or pediatric, there was a lot of naysayers out there. There was a lot of shut doors. There was a lot of people. I've had physicians say, I will sue you. I will for child abuse. Like, it was crazy, but that's what it was. And then AHA changed their recommendations. We had enough evidence base to support the efficacy of it that IO became part of the AHA algorithm. IO, then IV, identical to subclavian and central access for pharmacokinetics. We held, which is not, the animal labs are always polarized. Just because of the nature of animals. But, back in the early days, we had these animal labs where we had goats and we would show the pharmacokinetics. We'd have an IO in, and we would do atomized aerosolized epi down the tube, and there would be no response. And then we would put a quarter of that into an IO, and you'd see tachycardia within 2 seconds and hypertension. Like the physiologic effects of those pharmacokinetics, you can't, you can't debate that. It works. So then it became just educating and expanding from pre-hospital to emergency department to ICU to in-hospital code carts. And I think you'll agree, IO is really just become standard of care throughout the world. I mean, it's been literally life-changing for patients. So I was fortunate enough to be on that early access of that and to see that. And then the company was sold to a larger company, and then it was time to just step away because I was there for 9 years. And I think I was on 645 Delta flights in that time. So
Oh my
I
God.
just lived on an airplane. Yeah. The travel was
Yeah.
excessive. So,
It's an amazing
but yeah,
innovation. I mean, it spanned my career. Before
yeah,
there was no IO. There's a few things already
yeah,
that actually came in, which is what I say to people now is like, fire and EMS. We're standing on the shoulders of giants. Like, our generation, my generation, really the next thing that we can do that's really going to make a massive change is change the working environment, give our
yeah,
responders rest and
100%.
recovery, talk about mental health, put in fitness
Yeah,
standards, look at the individual
yeah,
in the uniform. But as far as fire, for example, they already invented the SCBA. The Halligan is pretty
yeah,
perfect. You know what I mean?
yeah,
The
yeah,
extrication tools are phenomenal. Now their battery, even better. So,
yeah,
and even in EMS, it's not that often where something really, really good comes in. But
right.
the Easy IO, the MAD device, for
Yeah,
nasal
yeah,
meds, amazing too.
yeah,
Everything
100%.
you don't want a needle around, it replaces.
Right.
But
These supraglottic airways, this the ability to create better care for your patients easily. It's funny when you start creating, when I say you, when the industry starts creating these innovators, these devices that make the job easier, it's not always well received because some people pride themselves. I'm the only one who can get every IV. Well, if you take that thing that makes you special away, it's not always well received.
it's ego
So,
again.
ego. It's ego. It's
Hmm.
crazy. It's out there. Mechanical CPR. I mean, I can tell you, well, that's what my rookie's for. Yeah, but your rookie's inconsistent. You have something, regardless of the device that you use, that metronautically gives consistent compressions. Why wouldn't you use that? It's not going to call out sick. Its back's not going to hurt. It's not going to need, a day off. So things like that make it easier, make it better for the patient's outcome that are innovative. So
We
those
had the.
devices, all of the yeah,
I'm sorry, please.
please. No, I was just going to say those are the devices, and then there's, I'm sure, tons more that I'm not aware of. I'm not riding in a rescue anymore.
We had, I think it was Zoll. I don't want to misquote, but it looked like a boogie board, and then it had
The auto pulse.
straps. The auto pulse,
That
that
was
was
the
it.
yeah.
That was a
I
pain in
sold
the
it.
ass. I mean, they taught us well and everything. That didn't seem to work. But the Lucas is
I
the one
sold
that I
that for
see.
3 years.
Oh, did you?
I was yeah, I was the clinical and sales for that device. Yeah, they've redesigned it, but you're right. If the job is harder even though it worked better, it perfused better. Scientifically, it's it didn't make the medic's life easier. If you're not going to make somebody's life easier, or they have doubt, they're not going to use it.
Yeah.
But you're right. You're exactly right.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. But the Lucas is what they took the dude away off the plane in the end. But that one is the one I hear most these
yeah,
days. It seems to be well received.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's consistent. It does its job. So, and you're talking to the guy who sold the competitor.
There we go.
It,
You heard
the
it here.
autopulse physiologically worked better because I don't want to piss everybody off. It really did. The problem is it had issues with replicating the ease of applying it and using it. So
Yeah, yeah. They just seem to malfunction. Seem to kind of
yeah,
I don't know, come
it,
out of place sometimes. Especially again when you're actually
yeah,
in the
yeah,
back of a rig that's swaying and
yeah.
breaking
It's
because
hard
some
to
idiot in
overcome
front.
doubt,
Yeah,
right? Because there's always going to be doubt. What if I put it on and it doesn't work? And then that goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Should I have taken it off? Should I have been playing around with it, or should I have just jumped on the chest?
absolutely.
So all those things come into a decision in a quarter of a second. It's funny,
While we're
but
talking about that, and something I've been talking about recently, and it's interesting. I, like I said, was the Grim Reaper medic, like pre-code, lots of saves.
yeah,
When you went into cardiac arrest and I was your medic, you just, you're off to go see the good Lord. It's just going to happen.
yes,
So
he's
I
shepherd.
reflect on the moral injury piece. And
Yes,
when you think about how we're trained, if we in the fireside, we go do our little burns in the burn building, and you do a right hand search, and you find the baby, and you come out, and you put the fire out, and yay, good job, James, you did it right. Here's your certificate. And then in the EMS side, you have a mega code. Okay, here's your initial rhythm. Oh my God, they got into asystole, whatever. You work all these different codes and algorithms, and then you get them back. And what I realize is we do a huge disservice to our young firefighters and EMTs and paramedics because we don't weave in the fact that the likelihood of ROSC on a cardiac arrest is extremely low. And
yeah,
should we actually in the testing, should we weave some things in where they do everything right and they still die? You
yeah,
you test them on if they did everything right, but then you
yeah.
expose them to they died, and then maybe you've got to go talk to the family as well within this test. And I
Well,
think
yeah,
that would set us up a lot better.
your podcast with Diana spoke about that, and
Yes.
you're right. Like I don't want to say I didn't enjoy ever giving the bad news, but I would prefer I gave that bad news because I've seen it so many times done wrong that there's a way. And you're right, they don't teach that. I was teaching nursing school for a BSN program here, and one of my duties was I ran the high end simulation, and that's what I would do. Every situation was black and white, but I made them all gray because I want to know what you do. Like one of them, okay, let's and they're based on real circumstances. So I have a kid come in and he's 18 years old. He's diabetic. He's hypoglycemic. They identify it. They give him the glucose. He comes around. As he's coming around, I would pick up the phone and call in and say, yeah, is this Jimmy's dad? Is he in there? Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, tell me about what's going on with Jimmy. Oh, yeah. What room is he in? Okay. Oh, yeah. Diabetic. Okay, good, 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 good. And hang up. And then I go over to the microphone. I'm like, as the kid, dude, was that my dad? Was that Jimmy? Dude, don't send, that's not my dad. Like, he tried to kill me. I got a restraining order against him. And so the kid's 18, so he's an adult. But to have these students process in real time, oh shit, I shouldn't have given that information. Now what do I do? So now I wait to see, do they call security? What parameters do they put in place? Like, it's okay to make that mistake. Now you have to fix what you made. And I got more enjoyment discussing the gray area than the black and white, which I think goes back to what you said. I don't think it's done enough.
Yeah. Well, I think that's where the critical thinking happens too, whether it's, that kind of scenario or just any call. And again, this being shackled by the fear of litigation is the
Yeah.
enemy of critical thinking. I had an amazing medically amazing call. This young woman, clearly a multitude of drugs that she'd ingested, were on their way, lights and sirens, gave her Narcan. And in this very short transport, every body fluid that could came out of every orifice that it could come out of at that point. So I'm just cleaning up, red bagging all kinds of stuff as we're trying to go there.
Yeah.
But ultimately, what happened is she was actually in ketone acidosis.
Mhm.
So the cruise moles had kept her alive from the respiratory suppression of the opiates. So medically, it was an amazing case. So you address one, okay, now, but I've still got a bunch of things going on.
Yeah.
But if you're a cookbook medic, you're like, all right, check, I did it, and now
Yeah.
now you're done. So yeah, I mean, just the ability to think laterally, not
Yeah.
only on the medical side, but just the compassion side. And I've made mistakes. I've been too callous on calls with family around, and
Sure.
the
Sure.
frustration
But you
out
learn
of
from it.
yeah, exactly. But yeah,
Yeah.
I don't even know where I was going with that. But I think it's just important to understand, to be
It's
taught
the
to think laterally rather than
right.
this very rigid algorithm that you're taught by, whatever it is, your PALS course or your ACLS.
Yeah. So I have this thing whenever I oriented new staff members, flight nurses or medics or whatever, is it's a concept that if you're confident in your competence, you can pay attention to the small things. So, and that's one thing when somebody asks me, like, what do you do when you roll up on scene? The first thing I do, I don't care what it is, I slow my step down to a half step. I walk up and I look for the most scared person in that room on that scene. And I go up to, I know I can intubate the patient. I know I'm going to get a line. I know I'm going to do that medically. But I go up to him, I'm like, you did a great job. Thank you for whatever. You did a good job. The ET2's in the anus. It's at 22 at the sphincter. We're going to put it in the airway. Trauma center's weird today, but whatever the case is. And just like, now I control the room. Now I control, and I can see where, and once you take that high level stress person down, everything settles down a little bit. And now it's a time to move smoothly, which is faster and better. And one of the calls we had, it was my partner and I, Scott. We worked very well together. We flew out for a motorcycle accident, and we had an orientee, a new flight nurse. And we get on the grounds in Hernando County, and we get in the back of the rig, and they got like an alternate airway in, but the medic is there, just white as a ghost. And it's like, I paralyzed him. Like, he was so combative. I paralyzed him. I just put the supraglottic in. Is that okay? Like, I paralyzed him. And our flight nurse is down there, the orientee, and he's getting the airway and sucking it out and putting the tube down, and he gets it in. And, you know, Scott and I we're taking the whole situation. Again, lateral thinking. And I spoke with the medics. You did the right thing. That's the right call to make. Preventing secondary injuries. You got an airway in. We'll get a permanent one. That's fine. It's okay that you paralyzed and sedated that patient. Good job. So we get back. We're debriefing with this new nurse, and he's like, "Yes, the tube. I got the tube." I'm like, "Dude, that's your job. Like, you did your job. That's your job. You missed the most important part of that call, was how afraid and scared that medic was that they made the wrong decision. And they just needed someone to verify that they did the right course of action. Even if it wasn't perfect, it was right. And we as a team can make it better. You totally missed that. And that was the educational opportunity of that call, not putting a tube between the cords in the hole closest to the nose. I'm glad you did that. That's what we're training for. But this is the bigger picture, taking in that, what you said, just lateral thinking, looking around and going, okay, what needs to be taken in on this? That's not necessarily linear algorithmic to a patient.
Absolutely. Well, kind of shifting the conversation a little bit, as you progress through your career, when did you start writing? Was that early on in your life, or was it something that you kind of lent into later?
So everything's on a bet. So I have a trouble saying no. So when I was stopped working for VitaCare, there was a nurse friend of mine, and she was down in New Orleans, and her friend was an editor and asked her to write a trauma textbook. And she's like, I don't have time for that. It's not my specialty. So she calls me up, and I went back to flying full time at this point. She's like, Eric, do you want to write a book? Sure. Okay. What is it? So I've never written a textbook before. I've written journal articles. I've written, chapters of books, but never an entire book cover to cover. She goes, it's a 19 chapter textbook on trauma. Here's the editor. And I'm like, okay. I had no guidance, very little. And writing an evidence based medical textbook is exhausting when you don't know what to do. I'm driving to the library, the medical school. And I realized there's easier ways to do this. I can do a lot of this online. I need to get more up-to-date research. I need to get the evidence. So once I figured that out, but then, okay, I got these 3 chapters in, and then I'm dealing with, content editor, copyright editor, and then they have peer reviewers. So I'm on chapter 5. I'm getting chapters 1, 2, and 3 back. It was exhausting. I'm trying to get permissions for photos I want in the book that underscore whatever topic I'm talking about. I'm trying to get permissions for like the Wong Baker chart. Like I have to get in touch with her and the fees for that, and just like I vowed I would never ever ever do it again. Never. So 12 textbooks later, but once I finished that, like it was awesome. Like that's cool. Like I wrote a book, and then they asked me to write smaller books, and then I realized if I take my own pictures, I don't need to get permissions. If I can streamline the way, I got it down to the point where the last book I wrote, I was negotiating the contract price on it. It was another trauma textbook. This one was 19 chapters also. Um, and as I'm negotiating the contract over the weekend, they gave me another book on pediatric abusive head trauma that I did in 2 days. I gave that back to him because I can create my own charts. I can, I know how to work the system now. And then that final book from, signing the contract till I had it in hand was 6 months. Like that's pretty cool. And I put my kids in the book. I put coworkers in the book. I had a lot of fun with it. I took my own photos, and being once if you don't know how to do it, it's taxing. But once you do know how to do it, it's really fun. You get into a rhythm. Um, and then the one thing I'd say to peer reviewers: have you ever been a peer reviewer, James?
Oh, no, I haven't.
Be kind, because at about chapter 3, the peer reviewers like, I know more than this person. Unanimously. And then there's like little digs. It's empiric evidence. You may not have worded it that way. I might have used an Oxford comma. You didn't. It's not a tit for tat. It's a holistic thing. So be kind if you're going to do peer reviewing. So, but that's how I got into writing. It was just literally I can't say no.
So what
But I enjoyed
about
it.
what you're doing now, though? So the children of fallen first responders and people in the
Yeah.
medical profession, how did that idea come about? Was there an origin story? And then let's talk about what you've created.
So I would love to say that there was this beautiful moment where it all culminated. I was sitting at a stoplight, and I'm looking at this mother and her baby. And in my mind, she was a spouse of a first responder. I'm like, what fucked up our world. Like, there's got to be some point that kid's going to look at mom and go, why isn't dad home tonight? Or why is mom not home tonight? And not every profession does that. And then there's a lot of professions that do that don't get the recognition for that. But how do you answer that question? So then I'm like, you know what? I got some downtime and I got unbridled ADHD. So let me I saw a YouTube video on how to make a children's book, and I had a lot of trouble like trying to create characters. I'm using like AI to do the illustrations, and it wouldn't be consistent. And then I'm like, well, it's a Caucasian family. Then why isn't it an African American family? Why isn't it why isn't it diverse? So then I got Canva that I'm working with them, like in looking through characters. I'm like, fuck it, I'll make them bears. Like, they're bears. What's the flack I'm gonna get? Why isn't it a panda? Bear? They're bears. I throw a tie on one, it's a dad. I throw a bow on one, it's a mom. It's that easy. But that takes that out of it. And then I just create the scenes and just talked about, what would that first responder want their kid to know at night? Yes, I think about you. I have a picture of you. I used to have pictures of my kids on my flight helmet. Like I do think about you, even if it's the worst call or something that I wish I was there with you to help with homework. Like you're there. So, and this is what dad or mom does in a nice way. It's always a helpful. There's no direct, even in the book for law enforcement, there's no guns. There's no on the belt, there's nothing. It's always, the helpful side of it. And, we see this in you. So I wrote those books, and a friend of mine out of Broward Sheriff's Office, Chief Heath Clark. So he was running the aviation side, and he calls me and he's like, hey, there's this lady down here. Dawn Witherspoon, she runs the Four Paul Foundation. She really helps first responders and EMS, particularly EMS. Her husband was killed in the line of duty. He was a paramedic down there, got hit by a drunk driver, and she wants to know if you'll collaborate. Why would I say no to that? And oddly, I did write a book about like line of duty death, like just a cursory, just to kind of. I think something needs to be addressed, but why would I want to sell a book like that? I don't have an outlet for that. It's macabre, but it's also therapeutic. But anyway, so I called this woman Dawn, and then literally 20 minutes later, I said, "Send me what you want to relay in these books. What themes do you want?" She's like, "I want the theme that there's an extended family, that this EMS community, they're always part of them, that, there's going to be part of their parent that's with them some way or another." So, I took her themes and wrote them out, wrote the book, and then created the imagery and the illustrations with the Canva, and it oddly very therapeutic for me. um, to go through that. And like you, I've lost a lot of friends in this career, too many, and more to suicide than accidents in line of duty. But um, but this was great. So then, I put her daughter's name in the book because she wanted something for her daughter. So it was her daughter was the character, and so I gave her that book, and she loved it. And then an airplane went down. She's like, "We have to do a book for the airplane people for flight." So I said, "You're right." So fix the book around. And then in between this, I get a Instagram message from a guy who's a state trooper in Illinois who runs a Got Your Six Foundation. And he's like, "Hey, I came across your book. Like, I have this where I help fallen state troopers families. I lost two really good friends. This book is great, but it doesn't quite work. Can you rewrite it?" Or says, "Well, let's just start anew." So wrote a whole new story for him addressing that. And he's like, "Well, the part of your book says, like in the back, there's some pages that they can draw pictures of dad at work or mom at work, or pictures of photos of me and my dad or me and my mom." He's like, "This baby wasn't born when they died." So he took that out, just so that was very different for me. um, because it, these foundations take the books, there's no charge for them, they donate them to these families, and like I wrote them. I don't really know, like, you don't see the back of, are they helping, is it good? And then I get a text from someone, he has to remain anonymous, and said, "This is a picture of this child who lost their parent, and this is the first time they wanted to talk about it through the book." And the wife called me crying because now it's a nighttime ritual. Um, the fallen flight, the helicopter recently, like the books were presented to the flight crews, and the honor guard all signed them, and they wanted more and more people to sign them. And so they asked if I would add more pages to the book for people to write. So this whole thing has taken off, and like I got goosebumps talking about it because like I get no benefit out of this, but to know that it's helped people. I mean, like your books, they're words, they're your emotions, but until you see an impact of what that does, it's just awesome. Like, it's awesome. I don't know what else to say. I'm very happy that they reached out and allowed me to be part of this. Um, Even if it's out in anonymity, they're out there. It helps. It helps.
It's
So
amazing.
that's how that happened.
You mentioned earlier about your family losing the breadwinner when you kind of transitioned out of the home, and then obviously losing people, and then all the calls that you've had, and then this writing being somewhat cathartic. When you reflect back now, what have been your lows and what have helped you kind of climb out of that dark place?
I think, one, my wife is a nurse, and so she's never worked flight or paramedicine. She's done, recovery and open heart, but having a medical background where I can say X, Y, and Z, she understands that. Huge, huge. Um, Coworkers and friends, more the coworkers that are my friends. You did a podcast, I think, way back in the 300s with Ray Norton
Yes.
and Janelle. So Ray and I were partners for many years, and you know, Ray and I were the A team, man. And Ray is very open about the impact it's had on him, the careers. So the highs and lows have been shared, and I think that's important to understand that you know it, you're going the bad calls, somebody's worst day of their life in their family. You're part of that. Your team is part of that. It's okay to sit with your team and say, hey, that was fucked up, right? Like you understand that wasn't normal. And then we'll crack a bad joke about it. But then like it's so important lately, and this is going to sound silly. What helps me is talking to a lot of my friends, even they're all retired. None of us are flying. Well, some of them are. But the power of, dude, I love you, man. Like we've trauma bonded over a lot of things, and I really need you to know I love you. Like a brother, like a family member. Like you've helped me, and it's okay. The bro code is gone. The ability to share that emotion, it helps me through the lows. Just to know that they're there for me, and it's not the daily call, but there's calls. How are you today? What's going on? More importantly, what can I do to help? And those have gotten me through the lows. It's the family, it's the friends, or educating people that when you go up, and this is not my words, I've heard it. When you ask me, hey, tell me about the worst call of your life. Well, you're asking me to relive really horrific moments. And what you want to hear is the blood and the gore, where the most horrific calls of my life are took such an emotional toll on me. That yes, there might be blood and gore associated with it, but when I'm walking down the street and I get glimpses of these, this tarp that blows open from the wind and there's 8 or 9 dead children that I'm not touching because there's nothing I can do for them. It's haunting, and so you know educating your loved ones that there's going to be moments that I might be like, huh. And when's the moment you knew? I think it affected me. I'm asking you that, James. Do you know the moment? Like, was there a defining moment where you said, "Yep, this affected me"?
I always go back to this one we had, and it was early in my career, and it was interesting because that was the one that took my breath away. Put it that way. Now it didn't stop me from moving forward, but we had a horrendous car crash.
So
The passenger was killed
I,
in the front.
I don't want you to relive the story. I'm just telling. I'm asking you now what I just said not to. I guess you're more than welcome. I would love to hear the story. But is there a moment in your life where you realized, "Yep, I'm not on a call, but this affected me"? And I would love to hear the call if you choose to share it. I'm not asking you to relive that moment again.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is what's weird is as I've been okay, and again, I think this is so important to people to talk about.
Yeah,
Some of us had stuff happen when we were young that was shoved down by circumstance and buried, and
yeah,
some of us were just super fortunate that what happened when we were younger, there was some other things that helped you start working through it at the beginning. And that's the
yeah,
only difference between me and so many of these people that I've had on the show that have been in this deep, deep, dark place. The only thing, we're both people, we're both paramedics, we're both firefighters or cops or whatever it is. But so it was a very long story short, it was a decapitated 3-year-old. The engine company had covered the body. So it was actually really just this distorted,
yeah,
silhouette and then the little legs poking out the bottom. But
yeah,
where I had an insight into, wow, this is something that we carry, is years later, I was at Disney with my wife. I hate Disney, but that's how much I love her. Um, and it was so hot that someone had a blanket over their child, and the same
oh,
kind of little,
yeah,
aged feet were poking out with the similar shoes. And I had this wave of adrenaline, this
yeah,
massive rush. And I told my wife, I'm like, babe, I just need to sit down for a sec.
Yeah.
And that was it. So even then, was that
Yeah.
as uh, I have the same magnitude as me not being able to sleep because I keep getting these things replaying in my mind and the drinking? No, but that was just a real punch in the gut. Like, wow, it gave me more compassion and empathy because I was like, wow, if I'm doing okay and that flashback sucked that much,
Yeah.
I can't imagine what it must be like to get it over and over and over again. That was around
Yeah.
the time I was starting to be an advocate for all these, these things. I think I just
Yeah.
transitioned out. So that was really where I realized, yeah, because I mean, up to that point, everything really was just in the back of my mind. Even that
Yeah.
burn patient, and that
Yeah.
horrific day. None of them bother me. None of them haunt me. But is it in there? Is it taking a
It's
toll?
and
Of course it is, because
yeah.
you can't
Yeah.
see that shit and it not change you. And it's changed me.
Yeah.
There's no question. But yeah, that was
Yeah.
the real physiological gut punch where I was like, oh shit.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's in
Well,
there lurking. That's still in there.
yeah.
So
Thank you for sharing that. I guess that's I think that's important. And that's why I asked that, because it does manifest in weird ways sometimes. And it's not always just what you said, that textbook, I'm not sleeping in this. It's, oh, okay. I wasn't expecting that to come. And yeah, and what you're talking about is before about, people being exposed at different ages. I'm just under the philosophy of this. Everybody's broken. Everybody is. Some of us just have access to better glue. And that is important. The glue's there. Some of it got it earlier, some of it got it later, but everyone's a little bit broken, and to share this helps underscore that. So, man, yeah,
yeah, I agree 100%. And this is just it. I mean, the hope
yep,
in the fact that there are tools out there, especially today, as we sit here, everything from equine therapy through to psychedelics and everything in
yeah,
between, everyone's own personal toolbox, is available to them. But you've got to give them
yeah,
hope. If they don't believe that they're going to get better, if
yeah,
the person who's gone to a doctor's office and they were just given statins and they didn't have a conversation about, hey, you can reverse
yeah,
this if you change the way you
yeah,
eat and move more, there's no hope. Like, oh, they told me I'm going to
yeah,
be on this forever. So
yeah,
getting people to understand that post-traumatic growth is a real thing and that you will
yeah,
be different. We'll always be different. You can't unsee the shit that we've seen, but you will be a stronger version of yourself. You will. And then you
yeah,
become a beacon of light for other people. And as that kind of, parable goes, the guy's stuck in the hole and the doctor goes by and he asks him for help and he goes, oh, okay. And he writes him a prescription and throws it down there. And then the priest goes by and then he rips out a piece of the Bible and drops it in there. There you
yeah,
go. And then a guy goes by and he jumps in the hole and he's like, what are you doing? This is his friend. He jumps in the hole
yeah.
and he said, it's okay. I've been here before. I know the way out. This is the thing. That's what you become. You become the
That's
person
yeah,
that can help other people.
yeah,
So there's so
hmm,
much hope in that. And then understanding
yeah,
that, yeah, it doesn't matter what your own accumulation of tools is, you can start
yeah.
moving that way, but you have to believe that you can.
It's awesome. That is a great personification of using that story. That's awesome. Yeah, it's a humbling career. Um, yeah,
It is. But I mean, incredible human beings. This is why, what have I
yeah,
been out now? Almost 7 years out of the job.
yeah,
This is why I'm fighting for them because
yeah,
what a beautiful profession. I mean, they are, arguably the real leaders that we need to be seeing front
yeah,
and center. So,
yeah. That's one of the I love educating and teaching for that element alone. And when you share that it's okay, and you share the experiences, and if you're willing to share them and how you cope with them, or how you deal with them, or how who your support system is, and help them identify that, it's really important. So
absolutely.
yeah,
All right. Well, I want to transition to some closing questions and then we'll get to
sure.
obviously where people can find the books. Very
Okay.
first one, is there a book or are there books that you love to recommend? It can be related to our discussion today or completely unrelated.
So um yes. So there's one called let me get the exact title here. So excuse me for a second. It's Maxims. It's from Tom Gordon. He's the commandant of the Citadel, and I want to get the exact title for you. Marine Maxims. So Tom is a friend of mine and was a neighbor, and he uses kind of, there's a lot of books out there from the military and special forces or whatever, but what he uses is these little idioms and axioms throughout the career and how to apply them in every day. And I think that's important. We can learn a lot from these militaristic mantras, and knowing that sometimes when you reframe what you're doing and you reframe it, that it's good for you. It's not, the challenge isn't always negative. There's a positivity that comes out of that. So that's a good one to have. I just don't really have a full library of stuff. I like to read a myriad of different things. A lot of it's geeky stuff. I read a lot of medical stuff. I don't. I wish I had more wisdom to just to partake on that. I'm sorry, I don't.
No, no problem at all. What about films and documentaries?
Oh, yeah. The documentaries I like are the ones that just show um, what we were talking about earlier. Like there's a sensationalized view of things, but when you peel back those layers and you see the motives and what's going on, kind of behind those, you know, the everyday things. I mean, you can take it from, and there are lots of different ones. If you take it from, you know, serial killer ones, and you look and you start looking at these different backstories and how to identify that, uh, upwards of, these documentaries about, say, a tsunami and that coming through, or the volcano eruptions, and you see the real stories behind them. And I like to see that true grit that comes out of it. Like, you're in these cases, and it's easy to sensationalize that, but when you show the real people that are there during this avalanche, or there was one, and the grit and determination to find that one, and you think they're dead, the the real human gut comes out. Like, you can't replicate that in a movie until you see that raw emotion come out, and they're choking up, and you feel them, at the lowest point, and how they overcame that. Like, I love those type of documentaries, and they're sadly associated with tragedy, but I like that. So
Yeah, I saw the Avalanche one recently too. It was incredible.
yeah, really, just yeah. But
Absolutely. All right. Well, speaking of amazing people, is there a person that you'd recommend to come on this podcast as a guest to speak to the first responders, military, and associated professions of the world?
so I do. There's an old neighbor of mine. He is a retired SEAL Team 6 um, disabled veteran who I think has a phenomenal story. He's very articulate. He's approachable, and more importantly, to me, I mean, this man has overcome his time in the military and is so uh, relatable. It's not easy transition, to be there and then to come into a corporate world, a regular world where you're not doing these sensational things every day. He does a very good job at it. His name is Dave Sears. I would recommend him. He's a very knowledgeable and well spoken, and he's got a lot of backstory, and he also applies that to his life, and helps his kids, and helps. He's just a very understanding man. You look at him and go, "Wow, I wouldn't have known." So I like that unassuming humbleness that people portray like that.
Beautiful. Yeah, I'd love to get him on if you're able to help them.
Yeah, sure, I can do that.
Fantastic. All right. Well,
The other
then,
one,
no,
yeah.
please, please.
Oh, I say there's another guy, Ken Williams. Ken Williams was a pilot I flew with in Las Vegas. He used to fly for the movies, but he's also flown for Ventura County, and now he flies for LA County Fire. He flies the Firehawk helicopters. Um, Ken's had an amazing career over the last 30 years. Ken saved my life on more than one occasion, but I call him my hero for a reason. He saved my life in a helicopter. But I even was fortunate enough to go fly with him a few years ago out in LA. That's another one that would, I think, be a great person to have on.
Beautiful. Let's make that happen too. I mean, not only the fire side, but the movie side.
Yeah,
Obviously, I've got the stunt
yeah,
connection too. So
yeah, yeah, yeah. So,
awesome. All right. Well, then the last question before we make sure everyone knows where to find you in the books. What do you do
Oh,
to
yeah.
decompress?
Oh, so I love to play music. I'm not great at playing music, but I like to play the guitar. I like to play the piano, and I just like to spend time with my family. I know that's a trite phrase, but my wife and I, my kids are grown and gone. I love my kids immensely, but now it's my wife and I and the two dogs, and the power of just family. I think a lot of it can be taken for granted these days. We were affected by one of the hurricanes. So what you see here is the trailer we're living in while our home is still trying to be rebuilt. Uh, but it's okay. Like put that stuff puts it in perspective. We decompress by understanding. Yeah, it kind of sucks right now, but that's okay. There's a lot of people who have it worse, but we decompress by going for walks, by playing with the dogs, and just it's nothing profound. I wish once we get out of this situation, we used to go for bike rides a lot. It's just difficult to do. It's difficult now to do what we used to do to decompress, but we'll get back to it.
What's the timeline on getting your home built?
That's a fantastic question. It's been a it's been 6 months since the storm, a little bit more. It's been 160 days today since our contractor still hasn't gotten us a permit. So our home is, as of last week, they finally cleaned out debris, but there's no walls. So if we get a permit, hopefully maybe 4 months. I don't know, but it's a good, it's humbling. It's amazing how little you can get away with living, and then how little things can make such a big difference. We're fortunate enough we have a pool. It was disgusting. It was full of seawater and crustaceans. So we opted to take some money and get that pool fixed. And now every day we take a little moment, bring the dogs in just to enjoy something that's not disaster when you look at it. And just, yeah, it's good to reframe. It's not all bad.
Absolutely. All right. Well, for people
Yeah.
listening, where are the best places to find the books? And then what about yourself personally on any sort of social media or websites?
So the books are just on Amazon. You can type in Erik Usher, ErikUsher, and it's all the kids' books on there. The medical books, they're outdated by now. Every 3 years they'll need to be. I don't, aside from the LinkedIn and Instagram account, I don't have any like social media platforms. So yeah, no, like I said, I'm just happy that again, imposter syndrome to be on board here, but amazing that you asked me.
Well, thank you so much, mate. It's been such an amazing conversation from,
Yeah.
obviously the volunteering in EMS, the nursing, and
Yep.
then the medical innovations and the cadaver labs and the books. It's been
Yeah.
incredible. So I want to thank you so, so much for being so generous with your time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
I appreciate it. I look forward to finishing your book too, man. Keep it up. Good job, man. What you do it needs to be done. So thank you for doing that. Very passionate about it too. It's awesome.